Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here. My name is Ned Gardner, as Ruben said. I work with David and Nicole over in NOAA's Climate Program Office. Earlier this month, we sent out a survey to the contacts that we had, but that are associated with climate resilience and adaptation in the federal government. And we asked people to distribute it pretty widely. We heard from about 70, actually more than 70 program managers about their efforts. Not all of them were able to attend today, but all of them are interested in sharing information and resources so that we can have synergy across the federal family. So the recording that Ruben's making is going to be shared even with the folks, especially the folks who weren't able to attend, but it won't be publicly posted. So just so you know, your comments are your own, but we would ask that you turn off your video if you don't want to be captured on video. We're going to send out an updated program inventory, which we sent out in the invitation to this workshop, along with a summary of this workshop as we proceed. Next slide, please. About half of the solicitations that are planned for the next 12 to 24 months, sorry, excuse me, about half of the programs that we heard from have solicitations that are planned for the next year or two. So that's a lot of activity. And we felt it was really important to create an opportunity for folks in the federal government to be cognizant, especially because our work has overlapping interests. And we want to be able to contact our own constituencies about opportunities they may not be aware of in other agencies. But we also want to be able to work across agencies so that technical assistance can be shared. The programs that responded to the survey are really not skewed to one particular sector, private or public, academic, non-academic programs. So I think our programs across the federal family are really kind of casting a wide net. The overwhelming majority of programs do target underserved communities, even though less than half officially state themselves as part of the Justice 40 initiative that the White House put forward by executive order. Most, but not all programs classify themselves as providing technical assistance. And you can kind of glean from the labels on the left side of this graph hints at what some of those categories, self-identified categories, are. And this was a question that people were allowed to answer with all that apply. So there are a lot of ways that people interpret the idea of technical assistance. And since it is something that can be leveraged throughout the government, today's session is very much focused on shedding light on the opportunities to collaborate around technical assistance. About 30% of respondents of the survey did offer to make a presentation. So today's panel represents 7 programs. Actually, some of these talks cover multiple opportunities, some of which were represented by more than one response in the survey. So in the next roughly 40 minutes, you're going to hear from program managers about who they're trying to reach, what their programs aim to achieve, where and when projects are to be conducted, the societal benefits to be expected, periods of performance, metrics, and indicators of success, and yes, opportunities for collaboration across the federal government. So to get things started, I'm going to jump in and describe a program. I want to nod to Peter Schultz, who's on the call, who's one of the PIs of this program. Next slide, please. The WaterSMART Communities Initiative. And I've put a URL. This has been granted. This grant was competed and funded, but it has ongoing opportunities that I think people will want to know about. Next slide. The WaterSMART Communities Initiative really aims to especially pair, if you'll just click one time, Nicole, qualified resilience practitioners and communities. So the system to do that is one of the core deliverables. If you'll click the next time, the practitioners themselves will get funding, and next click, the communities that they serve will receive pro bono support to do adaptation planning. Next click. And in year one, the team has put together a slate of, is working on right now, putting together a slate of communities where they're going to be working based on where there are existing relationships and trained adaptation practitioners. Having said that, just one moment, Nicole, having said that, in year two and in following years, there will be a more broadly advertised opportunity to apply both as practitioners and communities wanting to be paired together in adaptation processes. So the overall purpose, if you want to click one more time, is to focus on the communities that are known to be vulnerable to climate-related hazards and that have been historically underserved. And so we want to build capacity locally to address decision-making that's cognizant of climate issues and that can work with the best available data. So the CSCI team is seeking to involve local or regional government partners, as well as community-based organizations. And the communities they're seeking to serve are generally not the very largest communities in the nation. Populations under 250,000 in one location, or regional projects of roughly double that would be considered as under the community designation. But the idea is to provide direct technical assistance to interpret and use climate information to build resilience. And there's going to be a replicable system, including training that NOAA is developing and deploying with its Office of Coastal Management, and a monitoring and evaluation program, which itself, I think, will be a major contribution broadly to climate resilience activities, not just in the federal government, but in the private sector. Importantly, the U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit team is partnering with CSCI, and they are leveraging our resources on the toolkit in developing and deploying their plan. So the monitoring and evaluation itself, this program is being led by a series of very successful existing businesses of a range of sizes, from very small to very large. And they're focusing on a theory of change that involves looking at, you can go ahead and click through actually. They're putting together a theory of change for monitoring and evaluation that links assumptions, outputs, outcomes, and impacts. But those impacts, the end results that they're most focused on, are really focusing on workforce development. I'm just pausing so you'll click. Increasing resilience in measurable ways, and understanding effective adaptation. Because we recognize as a team, as a group, that while we talk about adaptation and resilience, it's not always clear exactly what we're measuring. So this project really aims to fill that gap, that known gap. So there are many opportunities for interagency collaboration. We're going to prioritize communities that have been designated as in need, whether that be through, you can just click through these, Nicole, through CEDARS, the FEMA Community Disaster Resilience Zones, the White House Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool designation, social vulnerability indices, and really others. So the communities themselves will also have a chance to make a case for their own historic impacts from climate-related hazards as well as whether they are underserved. We also intend to leverage, this team intends to leverage federal funding. So knowing what's going on there out there in the landscape of climate services in other agencies is really essential, I think, to the success of the Climate Smart Communities Initiative. And with that, I will hand off to my colleague, Lauren Garrity in FEMA, and she will speak to you about BRIC, Direct Technical Assistance, and BRIC.
Thanks, Ned. Mostly BRIC DTA, but I'll highlight BRIC, which is DTA sits underneath of it. So I'm Lauren Garrity. I'm here to chat about the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Direct Technical Assistance Initiative, which falls underneath the BRIC program. So next slide, thanks. So the BRIC DTA initiative really focuses on supporting the goals and objectives of the larger BRIC program. BRIC is one of the Justice 40 programs. And so recognizing that underserved communities often have a harder time accessing federal grant programs, and that competitive federal grant programs often pose kind of a barrier to entry for these communities and tribal nations in terms of accessing those funds. The DTA initiative aims to help those communities and tribal nations access those funds. And so we support them by providing capability and capacity building, giving them access to contracting resources to support their needs, and then helping them to kind of broaden their network and become more societally resilient by forging partnerships in their community. Next slide, thanks. So a little bit more about the initiative. It's the Stafford Act is what kind of governs the BRIC grant program. There's a link there so that you can access more about the program itself. And the BRIC grant program is a $1 billion program which funds hazard mitigation, climate adaptation, and resilience initiatives. Again, DTA is really working with these communities and disproportionately impacted entities to help them access this kind of big pot of money for these different types of projects. And then again, we do this through our the 10 FEMA regions. We have regional BRIC DTA coordinators in each of the regions. They are equipped with contractor capacity, and then they work directly with the communities to help identify what needs they have and really scope out 3 years of work for the BRIC DTA initiative to accomplish with the community. So next slide. We're currently serving 74 different communities and tribal nations across the country. This is a culmination of 3 different cohorts. The program has been around for 3 years in total. Our eligible recipients include cities, townships, parishes, boroughs, this whole list, federally recognized tribal nations, groups of those entities and territories. And then our request and deadline period matches the BRIC program. And so it opened this year in October and just recently closed at the end of February. Next slide, please. The goals of the program are, again, to really bolster the climate resilience and reduce risk to natural hazards in underserved communities and tribal nations through technical assistance. So really kind of bolstering anything that would make a BRIC grant application more competitive. So anything related to those qualitative or quantitative criteria, and starting from the ground up. So we support hazard mitigation planning initiatives so that a community can use that hazard mitigation plan to leverage other hazard mitigation funding and through application development for infrastructure projects. So really the whole gamut based on their needs. Next slide. Our program is relatively new. And climate resilience metrics are really hard to measure, just as Ned mentioned. And so we have a couple of proposed metrics, and I'm personally really excited to see more about what Ned talked about, because I think this could be directly relevant to our program. I won't read off all of these proposed metrics of success, but we're looking for increases across, again, that whole gamut of reaching out to underserved communities, helping them with sub-application support, and then seeing them actually take that sub-application that we help them with through BRIC DTA to the BRIC grant program, and then hopefully receiving funding through BRIC for their climate resilience initiatives. Next slide, please. And opportunities that we see for synergies and partnership with other programs. We see opportunities for our program to feed into other programs. So again, we do support hazard mitigation plans. Those plans have a set of measures which can be used to act as a pipeline for projects. Sometimes the pipeline is the problem, or is a challenge, and so we can directly feed into that. We do collect a lot of data and produce a lot of data through the DTA initiative, and so that information can directly feed into other agency initiatives. And then one of the big goals is partnerships and kind of forging those partnerships, which can be beneficial to other programs as well. And then we see direct benefits in communities that we are currently working with, efforts that have provided technical assistance. We see that pop up in our program, and so we leverage that information in our program as well. So I will pause there. Thank you, Nicole, and hand it off to the next speaker.
And next we have Chad Stahoviak and from the Natural Resources Conservation Service.
Thank you, Ned. You got it. Howdy, y'all. As Ned said, I'm Chad Stahoviak. I am the Climate Adaptation and Resiliency Lead with the Natural Resources Conservation Service. So I'm not a program manager for these programs, but I am the climate adaptation contact for the agency. The Natural Resources Conservation Service, or NRCS, helps farmers, ranchers, and forest landowners in all 50 states and territories across over 2,300 field offices to address resource concerns through technical and financial assistance programs. Through our conservation planning process, we help producers evaluate 47 resource concerns within the categories soil, water, air, plants, animals, plus energy, to develop conservation plans that include different alternatives, some of which may be eligible for our financial assistance programs. Shown here are both technical and financial assistance programs, all of which are voluntary. The first three shown, Conservation Technical Assistance, Environmental Quality Incentives Program, also referred to as EQIP, and the Conservation Stewardship Program, also referred to as CSP, are NRCS flagship conservation programs available to farmers, ranchers, and forest landowners. All programs shown here have continuous application periods, with the exception of the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, or RCPP. However, there are ranking deadlines for financial assistance programs that vary by state. Next slide, please. Regarding program purpose and societal benefits, only shown here is step 5, take action from the steps to resilience. I think, Ned, you had a prompt for discussing that. So for steps 1, understand exposure, and 2, assess vulnerability and risk, NRCS published a revised climate adaptation plan in July 2022 that evaluated current vulnerabilities to NRCS's mission, operation, and infrastructure that may be affected by climate change impacts, as well as actions to address these vulnerabilities. For step 3, investigate options, an adaptation plan implementation team was stood up to investigate options for the 7 identified action areas within the adaptation plan. For prioritize and plan, the last implementation working group is finalizing recommendations now. These recommendations will then be presented to technical staff and leadership for integration into NRCS policy, programs, and day-to-day operations. So back to step 5, take action. As I mentioned during the previous slide, conservation planning is how NRCS implements climate adaptation and resiliency to producers using congressional appropriation. So shown here are 3 of the programs that I discussed previously: EQIP, CSP, and RCPP. As you can see, between the Farm Bill and also the Inflation Reduction Act, there are billions of dollars per year that can be used to help put conservation practices on producers' land, some of which can go towards climate adaptation and resiliency. Specific to resilience and adaptation, NRCS is working to integrate climate adaptation into our conservation planning process with our producers. So among those 2,300 field offices, the conservation planners are being trained, and part of our adaptation plan is to increase climate literacy within the staff. Also, many of the 53 climate smart agricultural and forestry mitigation activities that were identified for the Inflation Reduction Act also offer co-benefits and ancillary benefits that help producers build resilience. An example of one is the suite of soil health practices that we have that can increase soil moisture for times of drought or higher intensity droughts, increasing habitat for wildlife that are expected to be negatively affected by changes in climate. Additionally, among our plant material centers, of which there are 25, they're developing more resilient plant varieties, establishment technologies, management strategies that can be used by producers in a changing climate. Next slide, please. For metrics and indicators of success, NRCS is currently limited to only being able to report the numbers of acres where our climate smart agricultural and forestry practices are being implemented, as well as the number of plans being written. But we are working with, or our business tools staff are working to implement different features where we can report at a finer grain level. So those are in development now. As far as tools goes, planner, so only a short list here, and I actually forgot to include a couple. Our planners are using some, such as the drought monitor that was produced jointly by the National Drought Mitigation Center at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, as well as NOAA and USDA, to look at drought conditions and predicted drought when they are advising producers, as well as the Climate Toolbox, which is produced, or there are a number of tools in the Climate Toolbox produced by climate hubs, climate adaptation science centers, and NOAA. One example is a tool that maps future cold hardiness zones. Two that I didn't put on or forgot to put on here are tools produced by climate hubs. One is the Ag Risk Viewer that allows planners and any member of the public to look at historical crop insurance loss data for a number of commodities. Then there's also the Climate Quick Reference Guide produced by the Southwest Climate Hub that allows planners and also any member of the public to look at historical and projected climate, mainly through temperature and precipitation by county and state. And that those reference guides also show the top 5 causes of crop loss. Next slide, please. Opportunities for interagency collaboration. One example of how NRCS programs add value to other agencies. The agency's conservation practices are referenced by a number of organizations, not just federal agencies, but one example is the Risk Management Agency considers NRCS conservation practices as good farming practices related to their crop insurance programs. So it's being used towards their climate smart agricultural goals. As far as where other agency programs add value to ours, any input that we can receive on the effects of our conservation practices or improvements for suggestions. 2 agencies that I know help with conservation practice effects research are the Agricultural Research Service and Economic Research Service. And we also take suggestions on practice improvements from any agency, but we also solicit those to the public, and including land-grant universities, partners, private industry. And that's my last slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Chad. Excellent. Let's move straight to Rachel Melnick.
Hi, this was a perfect lead-in because we already just mentioned land grant partners. So I'm Rachel Melnick. I'm from the USDA National Institute of Food and Agriculture, and we're the extramural granting arm. So our first slider program I wanted to add was Cooperative Extension, because in the list that was sent out, I saw that the Sea Grant was put out. So I wanted to mention the land grant university system. So Cooperative Extension is a nationwide network of educators who translate science for the public, engage the public to act, prepare people for a better life, provide rapid response in disasters, develop partnerships, and connect people online. It's very similar to how some of the other capacity programs operate. We give a federal portion of funds that must be matched by the state and local. And this goes out to land grant institutions in 76 across the states and territories. Some of the societal benefits are a science basis. I've also heard called occasionally a K through Gray community programming. Everything from 4-H to master gardeners, master naturalists, and work along the food supply chain, including food safety training. Some resilience targets is target programming to improve rural community resilience, such as the Extension Disaster Education Network, or EDEN, and resilience of the food and fiber supply chain. Next slide, please. So another program we have, which is currently open because it has a rolling deadline, is the Rapid Response to Extreme Weather Events. This is within our Agriculture and Food Research Initiative, Foundational Applied Science program. The societal benefits of this program are response to extreme weather event. Some recent examples are Hawaii wildfires and California floods, in particular trying to connect faith-based organizations to disaster SNAP benefits through outreach and education. So the focus of this program is on critical and urgent solutions in rapid response to disaster impacts on the nation's food and agricultural system. The goal of this program is 1-year projects with short-term deliverables that are starting to occur within 3 months of award receipt. So some of the work is extension or outreach work. All of the program projects have that, but some of the projects also have a small research component to go along with that. So we have 3 emphasis areas on agro-ecosystem resilience. Do also like to highlight, we also have an emphasis on food safety, nutrition, and commodity security, as well as health, well-being, and safety. Next slide, please. Our last program, which connects right into the talk with NRCS, is our Climate Hub Partnership Program. And this program supports projects that provide effective, translatable, and scalable approaches to address climate change through regional partnerships that include the USDA Climate Hubs and Extension. In this program, there's intersectional work that focuses on training that is prioritizing climate smart food systems, including the effects of climate on nutrition security. To date, we have funded 14 projects that are collaborating and leveraging the 10 USDA climate hubs and are focusing on activities that support nutrition security while building communities that support and accelerate agricultural climate adaptation and mitigation. Eligibility for this is if it is the extension or outreach, very broad eligibility. If it is integrated, where there's a research and an outreach component, then eligibility is for universities. And now is a great time to connect with that program, because the deadline for that is September 5th. Great way to think about this program is that it is providing funding for outreach to external partners to work with the hubs to help expand their outreach. Next slide, please. Some of our program purpose and benefits for all 3 of these programs are assets. This is an asset that we can mobilize. We have the nationwide Cooperative Extension Network. There are boots on the ground. Some states have extension agencies in every county. My county actually has several extension agents here in Loudoun County. And we offer the base funding, but we also offer additional opportunities for funding through grants. And resilience and adaptation is built through changes in behaviors and practices. Next slide, please. So here are some metrics or indicators for success for cooperative extension: increasing partnerships to strengthen the resilience of food and agricultural systems. For the extreme events program, it's getting urgent solutions that are in response to extreme weather events that will start to have deliverables within 3 months up to a year. For the Climate Hub Partnership, it's extending the capacity of the climate hubs through funding with Extension and other institutions conducting science-based outreach. And for my agency's net climate adaptation plan, one of our metrics and indicators of success is increasing, or the number of working partnerships on climate initiatives within the US government. Next slide, please. So some opportunities for interagency collaboration. I always like to emphasize that some sea grant institutions are often land grant institutions. So different audience or community, but similar concept. We want to support work to translate science for the public. So anyone who is working in that space could either connect to the agency or to our grantees. Some synergies we're looking for is joint grant programs and coordination of disaster response programs, whether within our agency or with our grantees. And with that, I will turn it to the next speaker.
Thank you, Rachel. Let's welcome Steve Freeze from EPA.
Hey, everybody, and thanks for including me and including us at EPA. I'm going to cover a slightly different type of technical assistance. This is direct technical assistance from the agency that doesn't involve direct infusion of funds. Actually, it's a little bit more of a in-kind support or a little sweat equity. It's contractor and EPA staff support directly to water utilities. And these are the entities providing drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater services in partnership with their community leaders, community organizations, and partner organizations, including community-based organizations, using tools, training, technical assistance, and those sorts of data services to increase their resilience to climate change. This is really about surgical and concise capacity building to get them familiar with the processes to use climate information to be able to make decisions and build increased resilience into their operations and into their actual infrastructure. But it's also to leverage partnerships with other utilities as well as their customers, as well as their community and other communities nearby to do this effectively. Our process for identifying the communities we work with is rolling and open. We operate on fiscal year budgets, so we do have periods of performance, if you will, with our contractors as well as with our utilization of resources. So, like for instance, we have a full dance card for the current fiscal year, but we basically take solicitations on an open basis. We work through our EPA regions and state and water association partners for the most part to get those leads. Last fiscal year in 2023, we worked with 70 water systems and communities. This year, we have over 50 committed, and we are underway. The graphic here in the corner has the little flags of those that are active or completed so far this year. And we have a plan and budget identified for primarily about 65 communities and water systems already for next fiscal year. So next slide, please. So just generally, our program purpose, societal benefits, I've characterized these loosely, but it's basically translated data services. And it's not just climate data. So we're not generating climate data. We do some processing of climate data, but really we're focused on translating the available data sets that are out there into the types of information that water utilities are asking for of the agency to support their decisions and to increase their performance and make sure that they understand what they have in hand and can make informed decisions using it. And that the scope of that information is beyond just temperature and precipitation. It's now including economic data so that they can assess in a quantitative fashion the types of consequences they may experience under different climate scenarios. And it's looking at equity data so that they can gauge their vulnerabilities and exposures under different climate scenarios to ensure that a more robust and diverse set of consequences are captured within their assessments. And so we've benefited greatly from the work of our colleagues across the EPA, looking at like EJ Screen and those sorts of data sets, looking at census data and other types of socioeconomic factors, and also looking at property valuations and other types of social and economic constructs to make sure that the types of social vulnerabilities that should be included in the public health space, as well as other sectors, not just the water sector, can be included within these assessments when our recipients for technical assistance are requesting that information. We are also providing a tailored risk assessment process. So not just the data is tailored towards what the water sector is asking for, but the process itself is. We are basically helping streamline their focus on the attributes of the risk assessment that matters most to their decision. And then finally, the process is efficient to infuse adaptive capacity into their decision making. We're only working with them for 3 to 4 months. We're not trying to make an infrastructure planning decision that changes their capital investment planning process forever and ever with them. We're trying to help them practice the how to conduct the assessment to inform a singular decision or an ideal circumstance with them over this short period of time, and allow them to learn how to so that they can continue to repeat that and expand that scope over time, and then do that work potentially with some of the partners and some of the other agencies you've already heard from today, in particular under FEMA's direct DTA under BRIC and these other larger programs, where they can take this experience, some of these principles, not even necessarily our tools and resources, but maybe some of FEMA's resources, to take the principles and the concepts they've learned with us and expand that to a larger scope, to a bigger project, and be able to do that with those larger budgets and that larger time period, to do it so that they can build climate resilient infrastructure more effectively in the future. You know, other principles that we've also engendered, we have 15 years of experience doing this. We also have a lot of industry and sector experience built into our process, as well as fostering knowledge exchange. We have online tools. We support many of our recipients going to conferences to meet each other, as well as publications with EPA. Next slide, please. So our metrics, we've actually benefited recently through bill support to EPA, the EPA's Water TA program. Nothing the EPA likes more than metrics and indicators to measure our performance through our many measurements. But we really do look at how we interact with organizations inside and outside of government. Primarily, one of our best partners through the years has been WUCA. We also look at more comprehensive scope of how the climate projections that are out there, and I think many of you that are on the call, for doing the science and doing the publications of maps and working with Esri to get the data out there. We use much of that to generate the translated products that I referenced earlier to make them available to the sector, as well as citations that many other partners have made of our work in your case study maps, as well as your resources that are becoming more frequent. So this type of exchange are all indicators of our success, as well as our shared success as a community of providing technical assistance to communities. So that's one of the ways that we're measuring exactly how we're going forward. And then finally, funded adaptation projects, as bill and IRA resources are getting out there, as well as the increased adoption of our resources within the Environmental Finance Center and the SRF projects. We're increasingly seeing our risk assessment tool CREATE, as well as crew resources, being cited within the climate impact narratives, as well as some of the benefit cost assessments that are being included in grant proposals, as well as SRF proposals or grant and fund loan applications. We see these as measures of success as well. Next slide, I think it's the last slide as well. I'm not sure. I can't remember the template that well. I'm sorry, I kept to the template really strictly, so I have a lot of words on this slide. So I'm going to try to be very brief with this. I'm not going to capture everything I put on here. But our entry points, we try to connect folks to what we do in terms of getting our CREATE results out into other programs, as well as using the Water TA, as I mentioned before, as being adopted more broadly. Also depend on what you guys are providing. And we also, again, and this is actually one point I haven't made already, we've become a reliable hub for the water sector, the water utilities that I keep mentioning, for climate data and adaptation support. But we're not meant to be a permanent home or a permanent supporter for the folks. So we are looking for many of the programs that are on this call, and probably some that aren't, for the more persistent support. Certainly more persistent support from it when it comes to funding provision, which we don't do. So I feel very fortunate to be part of this conversation, and I'm glad that we have an opportunity to exchange information today. So I'm going to ask for the next slide, not being 100% sure if I'm pretty sure I didn't have any more material. So one of my colleagues will be following. I think it's Abby. So thank you very much.
Appreciate it, Steve. Thanks very much. Let's welcome Abby Hall.
Hello, everybody. I'll talk about our EPA's Community Change, Equitable Resilience Technical Assistance. Next slide. So this is intended for disaster-prone and disadvantaged communities. It is offering design assistance, community engagement, and partnership development to help communities develop climate resilience projects that are eligible for EPA's Community Change Grant funding. So a quick word about that. This is TA tied to a specific pot of funding at EPA. So community change grants are $2 billion in IRA funded grants that EPA has that are intended for community-based organizations and their partners to do very targeted implementation projects under Track 1, implementation for climate resilience and pollution reduction. Track 2 grants are more geared towards community involvement and engagement in government decision-making. So it's pre-grant assistance to help disaster-prone and disadvantaged communities develop climate resilience projects that then they can put into a grant application to go after that $2 billion in implementation funding. So climate resilience projects for our program focuses on new or expanded green infrastructure and retrofits of either existing community buildings and infrastructure and open spaces. And in some cases, the grants allow building of new buildings. So the goals are to address a variety of climate impacts: heat islands, extreme heat, wildfire and wildfire smoke, floods, storms, or other impacts that pose a greater risk to disadvantaged communities. So the key here is we're interested in how climate change is impacting people, as opposed to other funding that's focused on economies or infrastructure. So we have funding for this program to do up to 50 projects. We opened doors in November of 2023, and we're actually pretty close to hitting that 50 number now. Next slide. So I just talked about this briefly. Community serving buildings might be schools, rec centers, existing spaces that communities are using. So the distinction is not housing, I think, is one of the ways of thinking about community serving spaces. Public parks and open space, transportation and mobility might be green streets, bike trails, and then there may be some other project types outlined in the notice of funding that could be eligible as well. Next slide. I kind of hit on this already. The key is sort of this middle piece. So between when we open doors for this technical assistance in November, and we're accepting requests for this assistance on a rolling basis, we review the requests every 2 weeks and then assign those out to our contractor teams who are hired. So like I mentioned, we're getting pretty close to 50 at this point. So we're at March now. We always understood that we needed to start the last project no later than this July, because our design assistance includes 2 in-person visits and a lot of design work and community engagement in between. So it's about 3 to 4 months overall. So we knew we needed to get these projects started as quickly as we could so that we could finish them, deliver the final designs, budgets, and project summaries to the TA recipients so that they could turn it around and get their grant application in by November 21st. The community change grant is also on a rolling basis. They're accepting applications now through November 21st until the money's gone. Next slide. So metrics and indicators of success. We'd like to complete all 50 technical assistance projects. Ideally, all 50 of those recipients will actually submit a community change grant. And then the real metric of success would be we might get up to 50 grant awards for those TA recipients, and then would see projects in the ground within 3 years. The community change grant funding has to be spent within 3 years. So this program has been exciting and fun to work on because it is so quick and so targeted, and we'll know the results sooner than later. In that deadline is coming up, seems like pretty soon of November, but we'll be following up with some of these TA recipients once that NOFO closes and we're able to kind of engage with them a little bit more once the grant is done. So that's it, Ned. I kept mine pretty short and sweet. I hope that's all right. Probably good since I was last on the list.
Very good, Abby. Thank you. Actually, we have one more talk. Sean Kimbrell from Bureau of Reclamation.
Hey, good afternoon. Can you all hear me and see me okay?
Yes, fantastic.
Perfect, great. Yeah, thank you. I get to be last on a lightning round schedule here, and I'll try to round it out, be short and sweet. For those who don't know me, I'm Sean Kimbrell. I'm in the Department of the Interior, Bureau of Reclamation, Water Resources and Planning Office. My role is known as the Westwide Climate Risk Assessment Team Coordinator. Where that fits is within Reclamation's Basin Study Program, and I'll give you all a brief overview of that and all the WaterSMART programs. We have a lot that it's hard to cover in just 5 minutes or less. So next slide, please. So agenda, let's cover these programs and their basics. I'll show the schedule of these programs in terms of technical and financial assistance. And then I have questions here, but it sounds like we're doing breakout sessions, so that may be tabled. Next slide, please. So quick background on WaterSMART. What WaterSMART means is the SMART part means sustain and manage America's resources for tomorrow. This is a library of programs that have been authorized over the years from Title 16 to the Secure Water Act, which is where the Basin Study Program fits, as well as WaterSMART grants in the next section, as well as other authorities and appropriations through drought response and cooperative watershed management program. We also have some new programs with legislation from bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. Next slide, please. It's a Basin Study Program Basics. What it does is it provides federal support for science-based water resources planning. And who are eligible are non-federal partners, states, tribes, cities, and entities with water delivery authority that could participate on a voluntary basis. These eligible applicants are generally reserved to the Western 17 United States, and then some insular areas as well. And generally, a 50% non-federal cost share is required. There are some exceptions when it comes to either hardship or policy when it comes to insular areas. Next slide, please. Sorry, next slide, please. Thank you. WaterSMART program basics. These are all the other programs that are involved in WaterSMART. Most of them are grant programs. Again, they're generally a 50% non-federal cost share requirement, though there are some exceptions when it comes to different authorities and recent legislation. Applicants include entities such as states, tribes, cities, water districts, irrigation districts, watershed groups, nonprofits, and flood control districts within the 17 Western United States, territories, Alaska, Hawaii, Puerto Rico. And this funding is allocated through an annual competitive process within the suite of programs where we have application review committees review these applications. Next slide, please. A different way to look at all these programs, and this is how we can relate it best to the steps to resilience when it comes to planning and then doing something on the ground. You can see where all our programs tend to fit in the planning realm when it comes to drought, cooperative watershed management, doing water strategy grants, basin studies. Those are what fit into the basin study program, water recycling, aquatic ecosystems restoration. On next are some of the science and tools programs that we have in terms of applied science, drought resiliency, and basin studies. And then eventually all these on the ground projects, mostly relevant to infrastructure, but also more recently involved with ecosystems when it comes to drought resiliency, water and energy efficiency grants, all the way down through Title 16, large scale water desal and aquatic ecosystems restoration projects. Next slide, please. Here's the schedule as far as what's coming next for all of these programs in terms of when their notification of funding opportunities on grants.gov are posted, and then when they would close. Quick list, I know we don't have all the time. Folks can reference this on this recording or in the slides. Next slide, please. All of this information in terms and resources are on our WaterSMART program website. Link is there. You can see previously funded applications for all the programs. There's an interactive data visualization tool. There's a dashboard. That's part of what you're seeing on this figure on the right. The funding opportunity calendar is located there. This is where you can sign up as well for our mailing list and see recent announcements. And you can see just, this is an example from 2021 where when we talk about metrics of success, how many projects were funded, and then what part was non-federal funding. I'd say in 2023 itself, this past fiscal year, we're at 200 projects funded, where federal funding is about 70 million, bipartisan infrastructure law funding with the recent legislation is about 290 million, and then there's certainly a component of non-federal funding that's contributed depending on the program and grant. Last, I think it's maybe one more slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. I'll entertain any questions. If we can go one more slide so that folks on the recording can see all the program context. I'm just one of many in the Water Resources and Planning Office as far as program coordinators. I'm more so on the Basin Study program side. These are all these other programs under WaterSMART and their emails. And I will close out and I know I didn't follow the template exactly, there are many opportunities to collaborate. I know we leverage, for example, NRCS collaboration with Equip. When that comes to on-farm improvements there, a lot of our improvements through the water and energy efficiency grants and small scale water enhancement program are delivery improvements in terms of water supply to farmers. That's an overlap there, just as well as I noticed we have a lot of folks from the Department of Interior and as well as NOAA that we look to collaborate and manage these activities to the best that we can as civil servants. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. That's fantastic. Rather than go into Q&A, what we have planned at this point is to move into breakout groups. And we want to give people an opportunity to discuss different components of adaptation and resilience, technical assistance and funding. We've got 5 different groups that you can go to. I believe Ruben is going to assign you to a group, but you are able to change groups yourself. We'll go over the procedure for that in a moment, but first, let me introduce the topics. Workforce development. So I mentioned a number of projects are dealing with developing the capacity locally and through technical assistance support so that the workforce is more knowledgeable and can do its work. So Steve Freeze and crew and the Climate Smart Communities Initiative, for example. Another group will be focusing on knowledge exchange, engagement, education, and outreach. Obviously, these topics overlap one another. But if you're specifically looking at how to build that knowledge in communities of practice, you may want to go to that group. Climate-related exposure, vulnerability, and risk assessment kind of describes itself. Adaptation planning. So if you are particularly interested in the process of planning, Abby's talk spoke specifically to that quite in detail in that they're providing technical assistance so that you will have an engineering design that you can submit for building. And monitoring and evaluation, which I think we all agree is much needed in adaptation and resilience. So we have facilitators and note takers assigned to each of those groups. We're going to assign you to a group. But if you find that you would like, if you'll go to the next slide, please, if you would like to go to another breakout room, if you're using the app, you'll see a button called Breakout Rooms at the bottom of your screen. This slide shows that. And if you click it, you'll be able to select another group and join it. Please feel free to do so. If you're not using the app, you may have to click 3 dots in the lower right corner of your screen. And if all of that's just too confusing, just leave your group, come back to the common room, the main room where we are right now, and Ruben or someone will help you get to the room of your choice. So hopefully that's clear enough. And with that, I will invite Ruben to send us on our merry way to have a discussion. Although first, let's look next slide at a few discussion questions that I'm going to put in the I guess I will put in the chat so that it is available to, if you want those for reference, you can have them and use them in your discussion. But this is an open session for you by you, and you can steer the conversation as you see fit. There are a few questions to work with, and with that, Ruben, I'll invite you to send us into breakout groups for 20 to 25 minutes.
Absolutely. So I put a timer. You know, 60 seconds count down. That's when you know that your time is up. Each session is going to last for 25 minutes. I'm going to be here in the common room. I can see the activity when someone's talking, when someone's sharing their screen. Very, very godlike powers, but I'll not abuse it. And then if you're having technical issues, just come back here, and I'll attend to those things. You have utter ability to just move around, if you will. So without further ado, I'm going to open the breakout sessions, and I'm going to stop recording.